Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Hidden History. As promised, today we will be talking about a country that has truly been through a lot. It's probably the only country to have a successful rebellion, but never truly declare independence. How can that be possible? We'll find out today. We're talking about Haiti, folks. We're giving you the full history up from Columbus landing to present day. And we're going to do it all in a half an hour. Welcome. So, everybody, welcome in to Hidden History. We're going to give you get you up to speed on Haiti because, as I'm sure you know, pretty much you may be able to piece this together if you listen to, especially Monday's episode of Newsflash, where we talked a lot about Haiti. And at that time, I was kind of going through a phase where a mini phase, I guess you could say, where I was like really trying to research Haiti, figure out what the hell was going on there, because it is such a really tragic history. And I think, as I said before, one of the best ways to kind of understand what Haiti is all about, what the history of Haiti is, and of course it started as an island very similar to a lot of others in the area. Of course, it is part of the island of Hispaniola, which it shares, and I don't think anybody calls it Hispaniola to this day. They either call it Haiti or the Dominican Republic, which is the country that takes up the other 2/3 of it. So Haiti is, in its own way, quite remarkable because it's the first republic of people of African descent and the second oldest nation in the Americas, the first being the United States. It shares another attribute with the United States. It's the only two countries which were not able to abolish slavery without the extensive bloodshed of civil war where Haiti and the United States. So they had a big civil war to abolish Haiti, or to abolish slavery in Haiti, of course. While Haiti's independence as a nation started with the slave rebellion, the notion that this was a straight black versus white affair is wrong. Haiti's struggle for independence was a much more complex affair. In addition to black and white ethnic groups, there was a class of mulattoes who were important in business and landowners. Those are, of course, we get the Europeans coming over, intermingling originally with the native people of Haiti or Hispaniola or whatever they called it. It's had many different names throughout the time, and of course that created a whole different class of half black, half white mixed race people, which were the mulattoes. Also, within ethnic groups, there was some division between supporters of monarchy and republicanism, and to add to the complication of that, there was a role of the Hispanic people who shared the island of Hispaniola with Haiti. The full story will be told later. First, it's necessary to cover the origin of a French colony on the island of Hispaniola. So we start in 1492 when, of course, if you paid attention to history class, you would know Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It was on his first voyage to the Americas, established by a Spanish settlement, Navidad, on the north coast of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti. That settlement was destroyed by the natives, but Columbus, on a later voyage, established Isabela, farther to the east on the north of the coast. Farther to the east on that same north coast there. So the Spanish colony was called Santo Domingo, pretty much became a staging point for later expeditions and provided supplies for the conquistadors in Mexico and elsewhere. The first administrator for Santo Domingo was a brother of Christopher Columbus, and Spaniards were given estates on the island and the right to compel the labor of the natives. So pretty much right from the start, we are seeing the roots of the colonization and the roots of right early coming in. Howard's in People's History style. With 50 men, we could subjugate them, and that was pretty much what their mindset was. It was about subjugation. It was about making sure that they establish that these people are not people, really. These natives are not people, but they're pretty much a tool to help the natives the Europeans get the most they can out of the island. So, after the conquest of Mexico and the establishment of New Spain, Santo Domingo lost its status as an administrative center and its economy lacked dynamism. By the end of the 16th century, Spain was losing control of the seas to the French, Dutch, and British forces. Pirates preyed upon weak colonies such as those of Santo Domingo. by the middle of the 17th century, French settlers occupied an island of Tortuga off the north coast of Hispaniola, and later French Huguenots, I don't know how you'd say that, began to settle the north coast of what's now Haiti. So that's how it kind of shifted from Spanish to French. Of course, there's still incredibly high amounts of Spanish influence on that island because that later became the Dominican Republic. By 1700, the Spanish king had relinquished control of the western part of Hispaniola to the French. The French settlement was known as Saint-Domingue, but later the name Haiti was adopted based upon the native name for the area, which meant mountainous. During the 18th century, the French colony grew and prospered, but by the time of the French Revolution, Haiti was producing more than half of all the coffee produced in the world, and Haiti was producing 40% of the sugar for France and Britain, and accounted for 40% of France's foreign trade at a time when France was the dominant economy of Europe. And, of course, I think it's very, very important to say, and I think you probably, if you're any kind of smart person, would have put this together by now, the prosperity of the French colony was based upon slavery. By the time of the French Revolution, the population of slaves in Haiti was somewhere between 500 and 700,000. Most of the slaves were imported from Africa, predominantly from the west central region of Dahomey. The hard labor of the plantations, along with the epidemics endemic to the tropics, kept the mortality rate high, necessitating the continuing importation of slaves from Africa. The origin of slaves in Dahomey left its effect on the culture of Haiti, particularly in the religion known as Voodoo. The century of domination from white slaveholders over the African women produced a subpopulation of mulattoes. Mulattoes, being the offspring of the white elite, were given special privileges that led to mulattoes accumulating land and some wealth. They're of course, kind of three-tiered society in a very, very effective way for the people who are really at the top, which are kind of the pure Europeans, to keep their rule. If you have another group, and this again, it's a very effective colonial tactic used by people who are in power, which is to pretty much say that, well, oh yeah, you guys may be a little bit pissed, but at least you don't have it as bad as them. Like, those are the two people with no power that you have to look down on. So in a lot of ways, the quote unquote mulattoes were a much more, they were an effective tool for the people in power, the Europeans, to keep things under control on that island. But in case of Haiti, that wouldn't last. During the 18th century, communities of escaped slaves developed in the mountain wilderness. So that's how we begin to see the precursor to the revolution that would occur around 1806, I believe. These people were called Maroons, from the Spanish word for cimarron for that means wild. These Maroon communities eventually began to carry out some attacks against the slave population, or not the slave population, but the Spanish population there, in the slave plantations. One war that lasted from 751 to 757 resulted in the deaths of 6,000. The French were able to put down these wars, but not able to wipe out the threat from the Maroons entirely. The Maroons acquired military experience for this period of guerrilla war, and mulattoes of the cities acquired military experience while serving the French units, suppressing the warfare of the Maroons. So here we see this already developing dynamic of kind of when the one kind of worse off class rises up, the second to worst off, but still a lot closer to the worst off class, is there utilized by the upper class to put down any threat that they may pose. So mulattoes of the cities, again, that's how they got this military experience. And some mulattoes gained military experience fighting on the side of the revolutionaries in the battle for independence of the British colonies, the American Revolution. The mulattoes had a self-interest in preserving slavery in the colony, but they wanted their legal and social status made equal to that of the whites. So the rebellion of Haiti, again, it was not a simple white affair. So we had a little bit of a kind of mixed situation here. The rebellion of Haiti could be put into a little bit of a political matrix. So talking about royalist versus Republican, there was some blacks who were in favor of both. Mulattoes were mostly in favor of Republican rule, and whites were mostly in favor of both as well. So there's a little bit of both for the blacks and the whites, but mulattoes mostly falling on the Republican side. The political changes taking place in France at the time of the French Revolution brought change for the colonies as well. They were seeing all these ideas: liberté, égalité, fraternité, égalité, and fraternité. those ideas were pretty powerful for people in Haiti, and especially some of those people who were kind of more towards the upper class of the lower class, they were hearing about these ideas. They were hearing about these Enlightenment ideals and thought that they had a chance for them too. The National Assembly decreed that the mulattoes of the colonies who owned land and paid taxes would have the rights of citizens, including the right to vote. The colonial administrators in Haiti refused to grant those rights to mulattoes, and mulattoes rebelled in 1790. And the French put down, actually, they flipped the script. They put down the rebellion using black volunteers. Very interesting. So a clique of black leaders in 1791, including some Maroons, initiated a slave rebellion. Along the north coast, the slaves massacred all the whites they encountered, but the whites of the city of Cap Français were able to defeat the slave rebels. The death toll was 10,000 black to around 2,000 whites, but 1,000 plantations had been destroyed in the uprising. So already we see building up for maybe about half a century up until this slave rebellion, things are starting to get serious, and there has been some pretty long-lasting, long-building tension between the races and the classes in Haiti. So after the defeat of the slave rebellion in the north, there was a separate rebellion of mulattoes in the west and the south. In the south, the white administrators again used black troops to put down the mulatto rebellion. The National Assembly in France demanded that the colony grant equal rights to the mulattoes again. Now a division developed within the whites of Haiti between those who accepted the commands of the revolutionaries in Paris and those who still wanted Louis back in charge. Political chaos in the various regions of Haiti, where in some places black slaves fought white masters, and others mulattoes fought white administrators, and in still others black whalers fought white Republicans and mulatto Republicans. So everyone was really all over the place. Some leaders did emerge from the chaos. The background of one of the leaders is of interest, and that leader is Toussaint Louverture. He was a black slave of a family which trained him as a house servant and provided him with an education, and he was one of the very few black leaders who could read and write. When he heard of the slave rebellion, he arranged for the evacuation of his master's family from Haiti and then led the rebellion. At least he got the family out there, you know. What a good guy. Anyway, in April of 1793, Republican French forces, with the aid of thousands of blacks, defeated the white royalist forces at Cap Français. The black recruits to the Republican cause were promised their freedom. But in August of 1793, the Republican French administrator of Haiti abolished slavery. So very, very exciting. So that was pretty cool, right? We got the French revolutionary people, a little bit more progressive, actually sticking to their ideals here in the 1790s, abolishing slavery. 3 black rebellion leaders chose not to ally themselves with the Republican administrators of Haiti, and instead committed themselves to representatives of the Spanish kings. Spanish king in Santo Domingo. The Spanish authorities provided them with supplies for 2 separate armies led by black Haitians. One of them was led by Toussaint. It is believed that Spain and Britain agreed to divide Haiti between them. British troops landed on Mont Saint-Nicolas near the tip of the northern peninsula and at Jérémie near the tip of the southern peninsula. They then moved east to attack the city, which is now Port-au-Prince, and captured it in June of 1794. Disease incapacitated British troops, tasted their own medicine, getting diseased on for a change, and mulatto forces stopped the foreign troops for saving Haiti for Republican France for the time being. So Toussaint, the black leader who had allied himself with royalist Spain, decided to then switch sides. The deciding factor was that Republican French authorities would abolish slavery, but Spain, though it had promised to abolish slavery, had not done so in the territory it captured. So the real abolishers of slavery, Louverture felt, would be the French. So that's how they went. By July of 1794, France and Spain signed the Treaty of Reiswick, which required Spain to turn over the western part of its holding on the island to Hispaniola, and western part of the island of Hispaniola over to France. So that meant Spain could no longer provide supplies or refuge to black royalist forces fighting in Haiti. Those troops then disbanded and joined Toussaint. In 1795, the Treaty of Basel in Spain ceded the rest of its holdings on Hispaniola to France. So pretty much finally kicking Spain off the island, and you would probably say mistaken alliance that overture made with Spain was no longer a problem. In 1796, mulatto forces were attempting to depose the French commander of the Republican troops, and Toussaint came to his rescue. In gratitude, that commander made Toussaint the lieutenant governor of Haiti. Later, French commissioners made Toussaint the commander of all French forces in Haiti. Toussaint then consolidated his power by bringing one commander of mulatto forces, Revolt, into an alliance and negotiated a truce with the invading British forces. He subsequently expelled the French commissioner. So it was pretty much all Haiti all the time. No French influence, whether it was the Republicans, whether it was the Royalists, and it really felt like the Republicans at this point were leading the charge. Royalist forces, at least on the French side, were not much of a factor anymore. And when Rigaud's forces clashed with Toussaint's forces, this is mulatto versus kind of more slave in the Haitian island, they were defeated. So Toussaint won, in part with supplies provided by the U.S., which is interesting. In 1800, Rigaud left Haiti, leaving Toussaint in undisputed control of Haiti and the rest of Hispaniola. In 1801, a new constitution made by Toussaint made him Governor General for life, baby. Let's go. That's pretty exciting. In 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte sent 16 to 20,000 troops under the command of his brother-in-law to take control away from Toussaint. These forces, with the aid of white and mulatto forces, wore down Toussaint's army, and two of his lieutenants, along with their troops, switched sides. Toussaint surrendered and was later taken to France, where he was imprisoned and finally died. When Napoleon restored slavery on the Caribbean island of Martinique, Haitian leaders again rebelled against the French. War between Britain and France again broke out, kind of a common theme. To raise funds, Napoleon sold Louisiana to the United States. This meant that Haiti no longer had the strategic importance to France that it once had, and Napoleon no longer wanted to use military resources to suppress the rebellion. The commander of the French forces in Haiti fled to Jamaica, leaving Haiti in control of the black general Jean-Jacques Desolation, a former field slave. So that was pretty much it. At this point, Haiti now under the complete control of black general Jean-Jacques Desolation, who was, again, a former field slave. So things were looking pretty good, to say the least, for the slaves and the native people of Haiti. Among the troops Napoleon sent to Haiti were a regiment of Polish troops. When Napoleon's forces failed to gain control of Haiti, Polish troops, rather than returning to Europe, settled in Haiti, took Haitian wives, and raised family. Their descendants still live in Haiti and maintain their Polish identification. Some have blue eyes. So there is a kind of interesting Polish combination there, a little Polish influence there. So on January the 1st, 1804, Haiti declared independence from France, and by 1805, Desolation had declared himself the Emperor of Haiti. So Emperor Desolation tried to create a court, but his efforts were the subject of ridicule by the more educated mulattoes. He did not, however, give titles, taking the position that only he could be royal. Desolation then tried to establish ties between the black mulatto leadership by encouraging marriages. The major mulatto leader in the military, Alexandre Pétion, refused the offer of a marriage to a daughter of Desolation. Desolation failed in other matters as well. He tried to revive production by forced labor on the plantations, but failed. He also tried to secure, that was definitely not going to work. He also tried to secure control of the Spanish eastern side of the island, but that too failed. Desolation was ultimately assassinated, probably upon the orders of one or more of the mulatto leaders who really did not like someone who was not mulatto, and who they thought was kind of below them in the French established hierarchy, leading the island. So after the death of Desolation, there were two strong contenders for the rule of Haiti, Henri Christophe and Alexandre Pétion, the mulatto leader. The mulatto elite created a constitutional assembly to form a government. The elite selected Henri Christophe, a black general, to be the president, and Alexandre Pétion to head the legislature. The selection of Christophe was a case of the elite attempting to support stand-in black leaders who could follow the diktats of the elite. This was called politique de doublure. Christophe had no intention of being a puppet president. He raised an army and marched on Port-au-Prince again, but could not take the city, which was commanded by Pétion, again, head of the legislature at the time, which didn't seem to be doing too much legislation. And he had the artillery pretty much that Christophe lacked. Christophe marched north and captured Cap-Haitien, which is another pretty prominent city. Christophe declared himself King Henry of the First of Haiti and renamed Cap Haitien Cap Henry. So, okay, whatever you want to do with that. He brought in warriors from the Dahomey in Central Africa to serve as his elite guard. In the south, Alexandre Pétion was made president for life of the Republic of Haiti, and with the capital being at Port-au-Prince, Christophe made an effort to revive the export economy of Haiti. The plantations were kept intact and under state ownership. The freed plantation slaves could not leave their plantations. Working conditions were easier than they were under slavery, and the plantation workers, though, did get 1/4 of the crop for remuneration. King Henry tried to create a royal aristocracy by giving out titles. Some were amusing, such as the Count of Marmalade. He also, at great cost in human lives, built possibly 10 to 20,000 people died building a palace for himself and a citadel at Sans-Souci and a citadel at La Ferrière. King Henry's rule was severe, but as export production improved, standards for living in the kingdom improved as well. As Pétion's republic in the south, conditions were really in a far different direction. Pétion, who became president for life in the Republic, believed that in the ideals and policies of the French Revolution, Enlightenment ideals. He distributed state-owned land in small parcels to create a society of free yeoman farmers. Kind of similar to what was going on to a certain extent in the United States, but a little less like completely racialized like it was in the United States. The land was given free to soldiers and sold at low cost to others. The small farmers of the Republic tended to produce for their own subsistence and not the crops for export, such as sugarcane. Small farmers did produce coffee for a cash crop, but not sufficient quantity to generate export earnings to pay for imports. Without sugar cane production on the south, the sugar mills and other subsidiary enterprises had to close, thus depressing the economy. The country study for Haiti summed the situation up as follows. In the south, the average Haitian was an isolated, poor, free, and relatively content yeoman. In the north, the average Haitian was a resentful but comparatively prosperous laborer. Interesting. So it really is, when you think about it, all mental. Alexandre Pétion was widely respected and honored. He provided refuge and assistance to Simon Bolivar, which enabled Bolivar to recover from a defeat at the hands of the Spanish and go on to win independence for Hispanic South America. When Pétion died in 1818, King Henry attempted a reconciliation of the two Haitis, but the republics of the South did not want rule by an autocrat. Later, King Henry suffered a stroke and realized that he would lose control of his kingdom. He knew he could expect harsh treatment from his subjects, so he committed suicide. The Republic had selected an aide of Pétion to govern. In the meantime, when Pétion peaced out, General JeanPierre Beauer. When King Henry committed suicide in 1820, Beauer led an army to the north to capture Cap-Haitien and reunite Haiti. In 1822, Beauer conquered the Spanish parts of Hispaniola, thus bringing all of Hispaniola under control from Port-au-Prince. So big deal here. Pétion's replacement in the Republic of Haiti got the Dominican Republic Part 2, which is pretty crazy. Under Beauer, though, control the economy of Haiti stagnated. He made matters worse by making a large payment to the government of France to secure final acceptance of Haitian independence. So this was the reparations. So pretty much what happened here was in 1825, so just barely 2 decades after they had won full independence against all odds, Haiti was forced to begin paying enormous reparations to the French slaveholders it had overthrown. Those payments would have been a staggering burden for any fledgling nation, but Haiti wasn't just any fledgling nation. It was a republic formed and led by blacks who'd risen up against the institution of slavery. So as such, Haiti's independence was viewed as a threat by all slave-owning countries, especially their neighbors to the north in the United States, and that was why for a good 60 or so years after their independence in the 1800s, people should be thinking what key historical event happened in the 1860s that may have led the United States to change their position on this matter, the Civil War. Haiti did not recognize the United States for a good 60 years because they were afraid that the slaveholding people were afraid that the slaves, seeing the fact that, there was a successful slave revolt where the people literally won their independence, the slaves won their independence, people in the South did not like that and refused to see Haiti recognized. So, as such, Haiti's independence, again, was reviewed by a threat. The United States included. Thus, Haiti, tiny and impoverished and all alone in a very hostile world, had little choice but to accede to France's reparation demands, which were delivered to Port-au-Prince by a heavily armed fleet of armed heavily armed fleet of warships in 1825. By complying with an ultimatum that pretty much amounted to extortion, Haiti gained immunity from French military invasion, relief from political and economic isolation, and a crippling debt that took 122 years to pay off. Just, really insane stuff here. Pretty much enslaving in their own way, financially enslaving the nation of Haiti for many, many years to come, and making sure that financially, at least, it would always be under the thumb of a Western power. France's kind of Stockholm Syndrome demand for reparations seems comically outrageous today, kind of equivalent to a kidnapper suing his escaped hostage for the cost of fixing a window that had been broken during the escape. And though the present French government can't be blamed for the goal of King Charles X, which is French ruler in 1825, a modicum of historical accountability sure would be nice. While France still ranks among the world's wealthiest nations, Haiti, with a per capita annual income of $350, a power grid that fails on a regular basis, and a network of roads that's more than 50% unpaved, is plagued by drought, food shortages, and a struggling economy. For the crime of shaking off the yoke of involuntary servitude, Haiti dutifully paid France reparations over the course of nearly 6 generations with interest. France should do the right thing now, and in my opinion, return these payments, estimated to total $21 billion in today's net worth. But maybe they should probably do that when they are able to set up a government that can actually process those in the first place. I think that would be fair. I definitely don't want someone like Jovenel Moïse handling $21 billion in reparation payments from Haiti after all the embezzling he's tried to do. Unfortunately, very confused, shall we say, leadership continued to be the theme for Haiti for much of the 19th century. Competitions between the blacks and the mulattoes. That was really what was going on there. A big fight for control, and really continuing into the 20th century for the first few years. The politique de doublure made it complicated to determine exactly who was in control. The two political parties were the National Party, controlled by the blacks, and the Liberal Party, controlled by the mulattoes of the cities. Hispanic nationalist forces gained control in Santo Domingo in 1844, and in the 1860s, Spain again came in control in the eastern two-thirds of Hispaniola, reestablishing what would eventually become the Dominican Republic. And actually, funnily enough, the Independence Day celebrated in the Dominican Republic is when they became free from Haiti, not when they became free from France. It was leading to some pretty continuing animosity between the French and Spanish sides of the island. So, in 1915, General Guillaume Sam gained the presidency and had 167 political prisoners executed. Nice. An outraged mob in Port-au-Prince sought President Sam, who fled to the French embassy. The mob took Sam from the embassy and tore him apart and paraded him through the streets, displaying parts of his body all over the place. The complete breakdown of law and order was used as a justification for the occupation of Haiti by U.S. troops, but, of course, there was a business impact. They were afraid Europeans were going to get in and get into some of the sugar and economic interests that the Americans had previously been enjoying pretty much unfettered access to up until that point. So, of course, there always is an economic interest. In addition to ending the bloodshed in Haiti, the U.S. occupation was probably influenced by the fear German businessmen, as I said before, might be gaining political control of Haiti, which would threaten U.S. interests in the Caribbean and access to the Panama Canal. Spoiler alert, guys, they didn't care about the people of Haiti. They didn't care about ending the bloodshed. They cared about economic interests, because that's pretty much what it is always about. In 1915 to 1934, the occupation took place. It wasn't fun at all for the people of Haiti. One of the massacres that took place was the Cayes Massacre, which took place during a demonstration that was part of a nationwide strike and an ongoing local rebellion. U.S. Marine battalions fired on 15 people, wounding 23 and killing 12. A Haitian writer named Edwidge Danticat wrote in The New Yorker, "In my own family, there were many stories. My grandfather was one of the cacos, or still called bandits, whom retired American Marines have always written about in their memoirs. They would be called insurgents now, the thousands who fought against the occupation. One of the stories my grandfather's oldest son, my Uncle Joseph, used to tell was of watching a group of young Marines kicking around a man's decapitated head in an effort to frighten the rebels in the area. There are more stories still. of the Marines' boots sounding like Gallipo, a fabled three-legged horse which all the children were supposed to fear, of the blackface that Marines wore to blend in and hide from view, of the time the U.S. Marines assassinated one of the occupation's most famous fighters, Charlemagne Perrault, and pinned his body to a door where it was left to rot in the sun for days. This was an occupation of fear, an occupation of brutality, and an occupation, again, for, principally elite American interests, which had come to rule so much of the island for so long. The notion that they were indispensable nation-building benefits to the occupation falls short, especially because the roads, schools, and hospitals that were built during this period relied on a tyrannical forced labor system, kind of like a national chain gang. Call it gunboat diplomacy or a banana war, but this occupation was never meant, as the Americans professed, to spread democracy, especially given that the certain democratic freedoms were not even available to the United States' own black citizens at the time. Think of it. N-word speaking French, Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan said of Haitians. During the 19 years of the United States occupation, 15,000 Haitians were killed. Any resistance to the centralized U.S.-installed puppet governments were crushed, and a gendarmerie, a combination of army and police, modeled after an occupation force, was created to replace the Marines after they left. Although the U.S. troops officially pulled out of Haiti in 1934, the United States exerted some control over Haiti's finances, at least directly, until 1947. After the United States left, the biggest threat that Haitians faced was their neighbors right next to them. That was the Dominican Republic, particularly under the reign of the brutal Rafael Leonidas Trujillo Molina, or General Trujillo as he was known, the U.S.-backed anti-communist, brutal dictator who thought Haitians were an inferior race of people. Trujillo, determined to expand his influence over all of Hispaniola, another very big thing that he wanted to do, in October 1937, ordered the indiscriminate butchery by the Dominican army of an estimated 14,000 to 40,000 Haitians on the Dominican side of the Massacre River. Some observers claim that Trujillo supported an abortive coup attempted by young Garde officers in December 1937. Vincent dismissed, the president, a commander and sent to Broadway, eventually accepted a commission of the Dominican military as his efforts for a reward while on Trujillo's payroll in initiating this massacre. So a huge deal this moment was that the massacre was called the Parsley Affair, or the Parsley Massacre. So when the first president post-U.S. occupation, Vincent, wanted to continue, it was made clear from the kind of overlords still, we talked about indirect involvement. Elie Lescaut was to be the next president. Lescaut was a mixed race and served in numerous government posts. He was pretty competent. Many considered him to be a sterling candidate for the presidency, despite his elitist background. Like the majority of previous Haitian presidents, he pretty much failed to live up to his potential. His tenure paralleled Vincent in many ways. He declared himself commander-in-chief of the military, and power resided in a clique that ruled with the tacit support of Garde. From there, we have a bunch of different revolutions. And in 1946, we had a little bit of a break with the political political tradition in Haiti, where we had the election of Estime in 1946 through 1950. Although he was reputed to receive some support from commanders of the Garde, Estime was a civilian. Of humble origin, he was passionately anti-elitist and then pretty much generally anti-mulatto, a pretty key kind of quote-unquote middle class of Haiti. He demonstrated, at least initially, a genuine concern for the welfare of the people, operating under a new constitution that went into effect in November 1946. Estime proposed but never secured the passage of Haiti's first Social Security legislation. He did, however, expand the school system, encourage the establishment of rural cooperatives, raise the salaries of civil servants, and increase the representation of the middle class and lower class blacks in the public sector. He also attempted to gain the favor of the Garde, renamed the Haitian Army, by promoting Revolt, this guy Revolt, to brigadier general, and by seeking U.S. military assistance. He fell victim to two of the time-honored pitfalls of Haitian rules: elite intrigue and personal ambition. The elite had a number of grievances against Estime, which, there always has been elite, and there still are elite in power, and they're probably going to pick the next president of Haiti, and the fact he just wanted too much power. Next, we need to turn the page. We cannot end this show without talking about the Duvalier Era. So, Papa Doc. We got to start with Papa Doc, François Duvalier. He was a former minister of health who earned a reputation as a humanitarian while serving as an administrator in a U.S.-funded yaws campaign, which is a disease of the bones, Francois Duvalier established another dictatorship. His regime was regarded as one of the most repressive and corrupt of modern times, combining violence against political opponents with exploitation of voodoo to instill fear in the majority of the population. Duvalier's paramilitary police, named for the Volunteers of National Security, but commonly known as the Tonton Macoute, known for the voodoo monster, again, pretty much a really kind of crappy way of exploiting fear in people, just making stuff up against. It's like if a bunch of people believed in like God and like really believed in God in this country, and all of a sudden we had like police going around that were like agents of Satan or something like that. It really kind of manipulative stuff. Duvalier's policy is designed to end the dominance of the mulatto elite over the nation's economic and political life, led to the massive immigration of educated people, deepening Haiti's economic and social problems. However, Duvalier appealed to the black middle class, of which he was a member of, by introducing public works into middle-class neighborhoods that had previously been unable to have paved roads, running water, or modern sewage systems. In 1964, Duvalier proclaimed himself President for life. Again, a very common theme here, as we see in the leaders of Haiti. The Kennedy administration suspended aid back in 1961 after allegations Duvalier pocketed aid money and intended to use a Marine Corps mission to strengthen the Macoutes. Duvalier also crashed with Dominican President Juan Bosch in 1963 after Bosch provided aid and asylum to Haitian exiles working to overthrow his regime. Papa Doc ended up passing away in April 1971, and power passed to his 19-year-old son, JeanClaude, known as Baby Doc. Under JeanClaude, Haiti's economic and political condition continued to decline, although some of the more fearsome elements of his father's regime were abolished. Foreign and officials and observers also seemed a little bit more tolerant to Baby Doc in areas such as human rights monitoring, and foreign countries were more generous to him in economic assistance. The U.S. restored their aid program. Baby Doc expropriated the Freeport Tortuga project, and this caused the venture to collapse. Content to leave administration matters in the hands of his mother, Simone Ovid Duvalier, while living as a playboy, JeanClaude enriched himself through pretty much a bunch of embezzlement while continuing to let Haiti go to the wastebasket, as you can say. From 1986 to early 1988, Haiti was ruled by a provisional military government after the Duvalier rebellion. The army pretty much forced Duvalier, Baby Doc, to go into exile. But in 1990, there was a chance at some hope, a real leader coming up through the ranks. In December 1990, Bertrand Aristide, a liberation theology, not libertarian, liberation theology, Roman Catholic, won 67% of the vote in free elections. Aristide's radical policies and the violence of his bands of supporters alarmed many of the country's elites. And in September 1991, didn't get it like barely a year, he was overthrown by a coup d'etat, which brought in General Raul Cedras to power. The coup saw hundreds killed, and Aristide was forced into exile, his life saved by international diplomatic intervention. The military rule period from 1991 to 1994 killed an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 Haitians. The coup created a large-scale excess of refugees to the U.S., and pretty much most of them were denied entry and repatriated back to Haiti. And guess what happened? A big reason why they were coming was because of that coup that Aristide has accused the United States of backing. In response to the coup, the UN passed Resolution 841, imposing international sanctions and an arms embargo on Haiti. Yeah, love to have that. Looks like they really need less resources. Haiti does. Good news, it is U.S. operation time, everybody. In mid-September 1994, with U.S. troops prepared to enter Haiti by force for Operation Uphold Democracy, President Bill Clinton dispatched a negotiating team led by former President Jimmy Carter to persuade the authorities to step aside and allow for the return of constitutional rule. With the intervening troops already airborne, Cedras and other top leaders agreed to step down. In October, Aristide was allowed to return, but under a real host of kind of very neoliberal economic conditions, paying a lot of debts, still kind of being forced under the economic weight and the economic strain of certain preconditions that the leader, Aristide, did not necessarily want to follow. He wanted to democratize Haiti both for their people and also democratize the economy, which is something that United States elites, Haitian elites, and really international elites did not want to see happen. So that was kind of the precondition for Aristide being able to return. So the Haitian general election in 1995 saw Aristide's coalition, the La Valasse political organization, getting a sweeping victory, and René Préval, a prominent Aristide political ally, elected president with 88% of the vote. When Aristide's term ended in February 1996, that was Haiti's first ever transition between two democratically elected presidents, a huge deal. In late 1996, Aristide broke with Préval and formed a new political party, the La Valasse family, which won elections in April of 1997 for 1/3 of the Senate and local assemblies, but those results were not accepted by the government. So this big split between Aristide and Préval produced a dangerous political deadlock, and the government was unable to organize the local and parliamentary elections due in late 1998. By January 1999, Préval dismissed legislators whose term expired in the entire Chamber of Deputies and all but 9 members of the Senate, and Préval then ruled very similar to what happened with Moïse, only by decree. By May 2000, the Haitian legislative election, the Chamber of Deputies and 2/3 of the Senate took place, election for those seats. The election drew a voter turnout more than 60%, and the FL, the La Valasse, won it pretty much in a sweep. However, the elections were marred by controversy in the Senate over the calculation of whether Senate candidates actually achieved the majority required to avoid a runoff election. The validity of the Electoral Council's post-ballot calculations of whether the majority had been attained was disputed, so pretty much that did not work out too well. Meanwhile, allegations were emerging of drug trafficking reaching the upper echelons of the government, and as it had done under the military regimes in the 1980s and 1990s, Canadian police arrested Oeil Jean, Aristide's security chief and one of his most trusted friends, for money laundering. Bedouin Ketan, a notorious international drug trafficker, Aristide's close partner, and his daughter's godfather claimed that Aristide turned the country into a narco country. It's a one-man show. Either you pay Aristide or you die. In 2004, anti-Aristide protesters in January 2004 led to violent clashes in Port-au-Prince, causing several deaths. And by that time, Aristide was departed from Haiti. Aristide insisted he was essentially kidnapped by the U.S., while the U.S. State Department maintains that he resigned from office. You know, make your own mind up there on who you want to believe. Aristide has accused the U.S. of deposing him in concert with Haitian opposition. In a 2006 interview, he said the U.S. went back on their word regarding compromises he made with them over privatization of enterprises to ensure that part of the profits would go to the Haitian people, and then relied on a disinformation campaign to discredit him, pretty much trying to make him seem as like crazy. Like literally he had a screw loose and was using some sort of medication to deal with his mental insanity. That was a literal U.S. campaign. Some investigators claim to have discovered extensive embezzlement, corruption, and money laundering by Aristide. It was claimed that Aristide has stolen tens of millions of dollars from the country, though specific bank account documents proving this have yet to be presented. None of the allegations against Aristide's involvement in the embezzlement, corruption, or money laundering schemes could be proven. The criminal court case against Aristide was quietly shelved, though various members of his La Valasse party languished for years in prison without charge or trial due to similar accusations. So that was really how we saw, quote-unquote, justice retake control in Haiti. Not the best. It was U.S. justice, so shall we call it. The government was taken over by Supreme Court Chief Justice Boniface Alexandre petitioned the UN Security Council for the intervention of an international peacekeeping force. The Security Council passed a resolution the same day, taking note of the resignation of Jean-Bertrand Aristide and swearing in a new president. Pretty much what happened after that was the UN peacekeeping troops came in, backed by the U.S., France, Canada, and Chile. Those peacekeeping troops are part of an ongoing operation on the UN mission in peacekeeping. That pretty much led to massive amounts of political corruption. And as I mentioned in newsflash, this past Monday, the UN peacekeeping operation saw a massive spread of cholera, which killed 10,000 people, which probably took the UN about a decade to fully acknowledge and pay reparations for. I mean, it's nice they did that, at least. Like, that's how low my standards are at this point with how the rest of the world kind of treats Haiti. But in the end of the day, also many babies were fathered in the result of UN troops coming into the island and pretty much having their way with Haitian women. It was a really, really dark time, and a lot of the stuff, especially after the devastating earthquake, so much money was raised. Like the famous example is $500,000 was raised by the Red Cross nationwide, and about 6 houses ended up being built. Really just shows you how much embezzlement, how much corruption from all different sources continues to take place in this country, and Haiti just continuing to be a piggy bank for America's elite, the world's elite, and really Haiti's elite to do whatever they want with it. Democracy for Haitian people be damned. That pretty much does it. I think we've gotten to present day. It's taken us a little bit more than half an hour, but that's okay. 45 minutes, not too bad. So we'll send you on your way, hopefully, with a better understanding of how this crazy situation, the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, who pretty much comes in just after the UN peacekeeping stuff kind of calms down, and more, obviously that is fully not recovered from the earthquake, but after there's some sort of semblance of normalcy, Moïse comes back, kind of a U.S.-backed guy, big supporters of the U.S., pretty much occupied the office ever since. Aristide was deposed for the second time in 2004, and we'll see what happens next. Hopefully there will be democracy and some sort of freedom, at least for the people of Haiti. This has been Hidden History. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.